everything they need to look after their pet and has more than 450 stores and 600 employees in the UK. Companies listed on the London Stock Exchange with an annual turnover of over 1 billion. Mike joined Pets at Home Group CFO in 2016, before which he was CFO at New Look, and prior to that held a range of senior finance positions at Tesco, Kingfisher and Whitbread. So we're delighted that Mike can join us today. Next, I'd like to introduce Tom Jack. Tom is a partner at the private equity house Endless LLP, as well as a non-executive board member at both American Gulf and Moda Furniture. Tom's a turnaround specialist, and prior to Endless, Tom was a partner at EY for 9 years and head of regions for EY's restructuring team. American Gulf, as many of you know, is Europe's largest golf retailer, with over 99 stores in the UK and Republic of Ireland, as well as e-commerce channels. Moda is a leading luxury garden furniture brand with stores across the UK. Again, our thanks to Tom for joining as a panelist today. Next, I'd like to introduce Ross Wilkinson. Ross is Managing Director of Workplace Creations. Workplace Creations is a boutique design, build and project manufacture company creating effective workplace environments. Ross and his team have worked with companies like Willis Towers Watson, Mazars, Britannia Pharmaceuticals, lots of companies in the Shard, and I'm pleased to say that includes Protiviti, where Ross and his team designed and installed our Innovation and Design Centre in London. Ross leads the team at Workplace Creations and has been with them for over 17 years. And lastly, we're joined by Jonathan Wyatt, who's a Global Head of Protiviti Digital and Innovation based in the UK. Jonathan's joined us for a number of weeks now, and he specialises in helping organisations manage the opportunities and risks presented by disruptive innovation, as well as exploring the ways that we can embrace new and emerging technologies. And Jonathan will be commenting on how we should approach innovation as we remobilise our businesses. So thank you to all our panelists for joining us today. And so, Mike, I'd like to go to you first of all, if I may, as I know you've got a hard stop at 8:30. Pets at Home recently announced a strong set of results to the market, Mike, and paid a dividend that was equal to that of last year. As we enter into this transition phase, what are the key challenges that you and your management team face as you seek to adapt the business to what lies ahead?
Yeah, thanks, Paul, and good morning, everybody. I hope that everybody's keeping safe and well in what are incredibly challenging times for everybody. We do talk at Pets at Home of managing our progress through 5 phases, and I think it's easy to think about those phases as being progressive and one building on the other. But today we're in what we would describe as our 3rd phase. And this is actually the phase of probably the most vulnerability for ourselves and probably for the country as well. Before I sort of describe a little bit about that, I just want to add a bit to the background that Paul gave at the beginning. Yes, we've got 450 stores in the UK. We've also got 440 veterinary practices, 330 dog grooming salons. We employ 10,000 people, 4,000 vets. And we're a multi-service and a retailer, and we've been following a pet care strategy around broadening our reach, attracting new customers, and giving customers everything they need for their welfare and care of their pets. And we actually came into the crisis, and I go back to sort of the 1st of March. I think we're in sort of lockdown week 11, but actually the 1st of March, we came to the crisis actually as a business with some pretty good strengths, and we'd had a good year, and I think that set us up well. But when the crisis first hit back in March, very quickly what we did as a management team was we agreed the priorities of the business, and we communicated those out to all our colleagues, so 10,000 colleagues, to align everybody to what we were trying to do, to create the framework for all our activity. And those priorities have served us really well. And the first and foremost one was to safeguard our people, because our colleagues were going into stores in those very early days into the unknown, really, as far as the understanding of the impact of coronavirus. So safeguard colleagues, focus on liquidity and cash flow, really operate within the values of the business. Our behaviours had to be within the values of the business. Treat all stakeholders the same. Part of that was, making sure we pay our landlords rent on time, really important, pay our suppliers on time, pay our shareholders a dividend, and pay our employees their pay. And our logic was, if there's any pain to be felt, we all have to feel the pain. It's not just one particular stakeholder, but to treat all stakeholders the same. But above all, the welfare of customers and their pets, because that's our guiding light. Those priorities have set us in really good stead, and they've helped the business respond really well. And communication has been fundamental to that. So I reference the video we do every day that goes out to all colleagues, can see the video. We talk about the progress we're making, what's important, the priorities of the week. But each of the executive team have also adopted a group of 20 stores. So I will speak to 20 store managers pretty much every other day, and I understand exactly what's happening at the coalface of the business, because that's so important to get that feedback back into the centre. So the first phase we look at was the sort of pre-lockdown phase, where we had a massive shift in the way that customers behaved. First of all, there's a phenomenal amount of stockpiling of product. We had our 6 heaviest sales days ever, all in a row, in the run-up to the 23rd of March. And we saw a huge shift to online. Normally about 10% of our business is online. That shifted really quickly, almost overnight, to 20%. We saw 3 years growth online in basically 1 month. And that 20% shift has remained the same since then. So we've had to adapt the business very, very rapidly, from fulfilling those orders, taking those orders, getting payment for those orders. We then went into the lockdown phase on the 23rd of March. And I remember that evening after Boris's speech at 8 o'clock, we always believed we'd be classified as an essential retailer and be allowed to trade, but actually clearly we needed confirmation. So I remember that evening we were searching the internet, trying to work out, are we an essential retailer? And there, it wasn't clear, but we did manage to find it. One of the things we have sometimes struggled with through this is the clarity that business needs really quickly to make decisions, because on that evening we had to know where our store's going to open on Tuesday the 24th. I mean, that was a really important, but we were classified as an essential retailer, so we had to respond really quickly. We had to figure out what that meant, what we're allowed to sell, what services we're allowed to sell. And we did a couple of things really quickly, took a couple of really big decisions. So, for example, we closed our grooming salons straight away, basically because we believed we couldn't operate them safely, safeguarding colleagues, the welfare of customers. We stopped selling pets, which is an enormous consequence, really, in terms of the supply chain, how we want to manage our way through that. And straight away, the RCVS, which is the regulator for the veterinary sector, put some pretty strict guidelines on what our vet surgeons are allowed to do, which suppressed their revenues by about 50%. But the immediate thing really was, what are our revenues going to be? What's the cash flow? Have we got enough liquidity? How long can we keep going for? Do we need to reinforce that? What about closing some of the cash gates? How do we preserve our funds? And that was the genuine emergency phase. All our colleagues went to work at home. So an office of 750 people, there's probably 30 people there today. So we had to adapt immediately to that way of virtual working. So whilst I think as a business, like everybody else, we sort of considered how we'd manage our way through this, the actual instant you're now working at home was, we had to adapt really, really rapidly to that, and a lot of new things. We had to make some big decisions. We made them big decisions very early on. And our logic was really on some of those bigger decisions. It's easy to put something off, to await for the final piece of information you need to make the complete decision. But we early on thought, well, we've got to make these big decisions, make them fast, make them early, and don't put off something ultimately we know we're going to need to decide. And actually, those decisions have held us in really good standing as we progress through the various phases. So that second phase, big restrictions on our business, but very quickly, we're very fortunate. We've got a very robust business, very resilient. People do need to feed their pets. There's 18 million cats and dogs in the UK. The supermarkets didn't focus on pet food. We actually got some new customers coming into our stores. We actually managed to get availability back up and running pretty rapidly. Supply chain didn't let us down. We managed to deal with a doubling of online orders. So although there was some early disruption, the business responded to that really well. We started to see strong revenues coming through. We did see a big reversal of the stockpiling, we'd seen in March, which led to trying to understand the underlying business was very difficult. We have put a big investment recently into our data capabilities. We keep records, customer records for our loyalty club. That was an invaluable source of information to inform decisions. We built capability last year in our data team and making decisions on, for example, store opening hours, stock and flow, amount we had to buy to fulfill availability targets. That proved absolutely incredibly valuable. We really couldn't have managed without that investment. So we got the business back up. Halfway through the second sort of lockdown phase, of course, we did our full year results. They were due out on the 21st of May, so a week last Thursday. Obviously, very different from normal. We had to work with our auditors to get our accounts signed off. We made that time deadline, had to work very differently. And clearly, we have to demonstrate, as a PLC, got going concern, and some very important tests the auditors put us through. But successful. We did a good external communication of our results, more complicated than normal, but we did manage to pay a dividend as well. I think that puts us as a bit of an outlier, but I think it speaks to the confidence we have in the business and the resilience of the business and the way the business has responded. Okay. So we're now going into sort of what we call the third phase, opening back up. I think June 15th will be very significant when all retail can open back up. We're seeing our customers starting to behave quite differently now. There's a normalisation of behaviour. That carries with it some benefits, of course, because more customers are coming to stores, but we're restricted still in numbers of customers in the store. Social distancing is still a key feature. We've opened back up now our grooming salons because we believe we can have the protocols to help manage to those. Our vet practices, the revenues are starting to build back. There's a huge amount of demand for clients whose pets need treatments that have been delayed. So the business is starting to respond really well. But, everybody's fearful of a second outbreak, whether that be regional, national, second lockdown. And we've got to start to think and plan for that. And one of the things we've got to help our people understand is, this is 14 weeks in. People are tired. People have been on it. Nobody's really had a break or a holiday. Well-being becomes very important. We're working really hard to encourage our teams to have breaks, to think about how well-being looks like in today's world. We talk about the rest of the year. So, into stage 4 and then stage 5, what a new normal looks like. So our messages to our teams are actually many of the things we were working on already before the outbreak, we're now accelerating. I referenced the data. I've talked about what we're doing, building infrastructure, particularly in distribution. We have to progress that digital and online, putting our people agenda. And I don't think well-being has ever been as important a topic as it is today. And we know our people are going to be at the heart of everything we do going forward. So that's where we're putting our focus at the moment. And our assumption is we'll continue to work virtually, probably well into the autumn and probably into the early part of next calendar year.
So, Mike, thank you ever so much for that. I know that Jonathan's going to want to come in on a question in a moment about maybe the future of where you see the business going and how and how the innovation's been holding up. Just reflecting on some of the questions we see coming through, and actually there's a lot of things coming through on the chat. and some reflections on what you said. Just to pick up on two of those, Mike, and I'm aware of the time, so just maybe some quick reflections on this. How is staff engagement holding up, firstly? And secondly, on reflection in a live situation, how good were your contingency plans? Was the insight you planned for was what you planned for actually playing out?
So on the contingency planning, contingency planning is all theoretical until you have to apply it, and nobody could have imagined losing access to the offices as quickly as we did. IT's responded amazingly well. People have adapted to using Microsoft Teams today, Google Hangouts, Zoom. The IT has worked really well, and I think that's been a real credit to the IT team in the office. I think managing the priorities we gave to our colleagues, safeguarding our colleagues, looking after our colleagues. There's a group of colleagues, for example, who are vulnerable in the sense that they're either carers or they're being shielded because of their health. We've got a group of about 350 colleagues that fit into that category. Right from the beginning, those colleagues were asked to leave the business for their own benefit. We paid them 100% of their pay, continue to do that. That is not, we did not furlough colleagues in that way. We've paid our colleagues, those colleagues 100%. And I think the way you treat colleagues is recognised by the rest of the colleagues in the business. It's really important because we expect a lot and we have to do the right things by our people. The other thing we did very early on is we paid a significant one-off recognition award as a bonus to recognise the fact our colleagues were walking into what was then a very big unknown and probably still is today. And that payment was £2 million in total. And so all store colleagues would have benefited from that. Okay. So I think if you look after your colleagues, that's a really good start place in all of this.
So, Jonathan, I just wonder if you would like to reflect on, because there's some questions coming through again about the future of the business. How are you beginning to target the new audience that you see, as that being different from your customer base? Jonathan, do you want to just
I guess
reflect on that and say that?
Yeah, I think a lot of the questions that have come through are sort of reflecting the question I was going to ask, which is really around, you mentioned sort of the shift to online, some of the changing consumer behavior. How much of that do you see as being short term, I guess? How much of that do you envisage is a reflection of things to come and the new way of working?
Yeah, good question. I mean, we've doubled our online business from 10% of total sales to 20%. I'm sure some of that will shift back. But fundamentally, people have shifted their shopping behaviours, that got accustomed to it. I think our job of work now is to make sure we can give all those customers the most convenient fulfilment, whether that looks like picking up a product in a store, so ordering it online and picking it up in a store. Prior to COVID, that was about half of all our online orders were fulfilled using the store network. We introduced new services, so a customer can ring a store now, drive to the store, stay in their car. A colleague will put the product they order in the car boot. We'll take payment. That customer can drive home with the product. So we're introducing a great variety of different ways customers can get their products. And I think the way of thinking about online is being either you go into a shop and buy something and take it home, or you order it online and it's delivered to your house. I think there's this whole mirrored spectrum of fulfillment between those two, and we're working on how we meet all of those. But clearly, you've got to do it in an economically sustainable way, and we've got to build that such that we can create value from it, but also our customers value it as well.
The one other quick question, I'm conscious you need to drop in a second, but the other quick question I had, and you talked a little bit about speed of decision making, and this was a topic of the week last week, and the importance of not putting off difficult decisions and just making snap decisions. I think are there some lessons learned there as to how the things to take forward into the future?
Yeah, I think and operationally did some big things that would normally have taken months to think through. I think it gives people that, I think we've been fortunate. We've had a good business to start with, and we've had good cash flows, and they give the management team confidence. But and the data we've got has given us the information enough information to make those decisions. I think, and none of those, by the way, have been any sort of look back decisions with regret. And that's one of the tests we sort of set ourselves. I think having the priorities is really key. If you can have some guiding principles that support, and that's underpinned by a set of values and behaviours that you know are consistent and you're living to, I think being brave has to be a feature going forward as well. I don't think we're going to ever revert back to some of the slower type of decisions we made in the past. I think as a team, we've strengthened as a team. We trust each other more. We already always trusted each other, and we're gelled. Even though we're working virtually, we're probably now a stronger management team as a consequence of that than we were going in. And I think that sets us up really well as we go forward.
Yeah, Mike, thank you so much for that. I think you probably haven't had a chance to see the comments coming through in the sidebar, but I think the thing that's really hitting me is people think it's fantastic the way that you approach your people. I think in particular the ethos and the principle-based and the principles that you've taken from this. So I think that's really resonating, and I think the braveness that I think you and your team have shown is really, really resonating. So thank you so much for that. I appreciate you have to go, but very, very grateful for your time. We will move on then to our next panelists, and so moving on to Tom and then to Ross. Tom, if I could turn around to you now, please, sir. You sit on the board of two companies that I imagine have fared quite differently over the last 12 months, both American Golf and Moda Furniture. Sorry, not 12 months, 12 weeks rather. But what are the different challenges they now face as you seek to guide them through this transition period?
Morning, everybody. Thanks, Paul. I think one of the biggest unknowns is what we're wrestling with now. Picks up a little bit on what Jonathan was referring to, I think, which is what next. I can come on and talk a little bit about reopening stores and the shift between online and physical, but from a big picture perspective, what does the next few months and the future hold? So Moda stayed open throughout this last 12 weeks. It had to close its showrooms, but it's predominantly an e-commerce supplier of garden furniture. Has its own delivery network with drivers delivering contactless to homes. The sales performance has been absolutely exceptional at Moda. And so we wrestle there with, is that actually, has this period in which its competitors have struggled, has it supercharged the development of the business, accelerated growth, and therefore taken that brand forward at a more rapid level? Or has this been an exceptional level of demand that's pulled forward sales from the summer, and therefore it's just a temporary spike and will revert to budgeted level, pre-COVID budgeted levels, or maybe even worse, below that, as recessionary pressures and job insecurity starts to filter into the market? So that's a challenge we wrestle with on Moda. At the other end of the scale, American Golf, unfortunately, golf retail wasn't an essential retail proposition. I'd probably argue it was, but and there's a chap who's appeared on the screen who's got a golf course in his background, so I think he might argue that as well. But so with the announcement in March, we overnight closed almost 100 stores and have had to deal with obviously all of the employees and the whole of the business. But golf itself, golf courses also closed, so that route to market really became very, very limited. So that's had a massive impact on American Golf at the point at which it was just about to go into peak selling season. So the challenge we wrestle with for that business is there lots of pent-up demand that we're starting to see now with e-commerce activity? We're trading on e-com now probably double pre-COVID budget levels, which is fantastic. But is there a great deal of pent-up demand that we'll see bounce back to very buoyant levels as the stores can reopen? or is this going to be a more gradual return, rebuild of revenue, and back to a lower base? And I guess as an investor, we tend to take the more prudent view on both of those, both for Moda and American Golf, because that's how we can plan our decision making. And I think one of the biggest things, Mike mentioned it just in passing before he dropped off. Then stock intake is such an uncertainty. It always is in a retail business, but when we think of our stock intake, trying to plan for what the right level of stock should be, both wrestling with that challenge of where demand will return to, but also competitors have got lots of stock and they're going to be shifting it to generate cash over the coming months. How does that impact on what we should bring into stores and planning over the coming months?
Thank you very much for that, Tom. So what do you think then? So how have you used then this disruption to assess your business model? So a theme that we've looked over the last few weeks is jumping off that hamster wheel and looking at the business model. So particularly at a time when those golf courses begin to open and seasonal demand is going to be soaring, how are you now assessing, and what are the key things you're looking at within that future business model?
Yeah, so I guess, first and foremost, we want to get out of this hiatus, open stores, and do so safely. We've had a lot of time to plan for that now. So the first objective is what does the operating model look like that is safe for all of the American Golf staff and also for customers. So and we feel we are absolutely ready to open those stores tomorrow. If we were given the green light to do so, we could. We've got very clear protocol as to how the stores will operate. One of the things that we've done is we're ready to post is a video that shows the customer experience from arriving at a store, the different kinds of purchase they might make, including custom fitting of golf clubs, and then through to the purchase and leaving. And I think that to us that felt like an important step to reassure the customer as to how this would work, and staff in the store. One of the dynamics, I suppose, of the American Golf business is it's quite often an experience purchase. The customer wants to go to store and try clubs and equipment and see them. And so whilst the e-com sales have really spiked since the courses have reopened, we want to still drive customers into store, but we want to get the right balance. I think the consumer has become even more familiar with shopping online over this last 12 weeks. So let's make sure our proposition is fit for purpose for that. We recently launched an exclusive American Golf app. Conversion rates shopping on the app are way higher than conversion rates on tablets and phones and desktop through the conventional site. So that's a feature that we need to think more about how to drive that e-com activity. But then how do we still drive consumers into store? We're a lower footfall model. The stores are medium sized, but we tend to have lower footfall with a higher average order value than perhaps a lot of high street retail. So that's still an important factor. And I think from an e-com perspective, one of the benefits was always click and collect. You can get a customer to go to store and browse while they collect. Everybody's working at home at the minute, so it's really easy to have stuff delivered to your house and not need to go and collect from a store. So how will that change over the coming months? So there's lots of things to wrestle with like that that are specific to American Golf, and then from an HQ central services perspective, do we need a big shiny head office? How does everybody feel in this new environment of working from home? Pretty comfortable seems to be the feedback, provided there are still opportunities to get together and interact as teams, and not all just be stuck in our home offices or living rooms, trying to chat online.
So it's interesting. I mean, with that potential surge in demand, I'll just link into a question I've seen here. It's an interesting perspective that the Spectator magazine has announced that will return or maybe reduce government funds that it's received via the furlough scheme, opting to increase those subscriptions instead. Do you think other firms that you see within your private equity world and indeed within that portfolio will follow suit and try and get ahead of HMRC because there is that fear maybe that HMRC will at some point look to investigate, maybe even claw back some of those funds?
I suppose I'm just trying to understand the question a little bit. I mean, in terms of HMRC clawing back funds, I think certainly within Endless, we took lots of advice very early in the lockdown and furlough period to absolutely make sure that we were rigidly following all of the rules around furlough and had a paper trail to demonstrate it, so we could evidence that at American Golf we furloughed over 800 employees.
Yep.
We made sure that all of those employees, their access to email, anything to do with the business was suspended, and they understood why. So that we could absolutely demonstrate compliance with the scheme. And there was a real challenge where, as e-com started to pick back up, we have lots of stock tied up at stores. We don't carry, a lot of stock in the central distribution centre. So there was a real temptation to bring some staff back to repatriate stock back to the DC, and we said no, we won't do that. That is a very clear breach of the furlough provisions, and we're just going to have to live and navigate through. So I think I wouldn't expect HMRC to claw back unless I would expect them to perform some investigations. They will want to see a clear paper trail that firms have adhered to the rules, frankly.
Okay. Jonathan, any perspectives from you?
Yeah, no, I'd be interested in a couple of things. I think you talked about experience purchase, and there's been a lot of focus on the change of the retail experience, the change of the high street. I can't say I'm a regular American Golf user because I'm a retired golfer. I injured my shoulder a few years back, so I used to play a lot of golf. I can't play any golf anymore. So I'm interested a little bit in terms of the experience side and what some of the things you're trying to do to actually genuinely make it an experience. And I accept there's elements around clubs being personalized and some of those elements, but actually making it something that people are looking for and wanting to do. Also, I'm just interested as well in your perspective on whether, if there is a significant shift to online, whether that presents a challenge, because often online really translates to logistics, because a lot of the challenges around how you can compete on the logistics front, because people will shop around to find things that can be delivered at the right time, and for any organization competing with the Amazons and others of this world on logistics is a challenge. So interested in those two dimensions, I guess.
Yeah. So I guess from an experience perspective, there's a number of levels to that. There's every one of the American Golf stores has in-store technology and fitting bays, so a customer can try clubs out in store. So a key factor for us is to make sure as we reopen that a customer can experience that safely, and likewise the fitter in the store can guide the customer safely through that process. So that's been important. But I suppose bigger picture, what we've really seen is a shift, or we sense there is a big shift in the UK public wanting to spend more time outdoors, wanting to pursue leisure experiences. And again, maybe that will be a short-term factor. I hope it won't, for not just for American Golf's reasons, for lots of reasons for the UK society. But doing anything we can to encourage children to take up the sport, people who aren't injured but haven't perhaps played in a while and want to pick some clubs back up, giving them some kind of entry-level opportunities to get back involved. and quite a number of the American Golf stores are situated at driving ranges. So it's really easy if you can get people into those locations. They can try clubs out and give it a go in a really easy accessible way. You asked about logistics. Yeah, that is a big problem. As I say, at the moment I think there is an artificial dynamic where click and collect from store. We can't do that at the moment, and nor can product really. There is very little product being collected from newsagents, convenience stores, and the like that are part of that whole collection network. So I think the working from home dynamic will help for a number of months still, but medium longer term, having that range of accessibility of delivery is really important. And how does anybody compete with the likes of Amazon? In their model, it's a huge challenge. At American Golf, we try and compete by not selling the products in the same way as the customer can buy at Amazon or pure play online retailers. We want to drive that experience in store dynamic, either at the store or the driving range.
And it's in just then to bring Ross in on this, because I think that store dynamic's an interesting one, because obviously that's the workplace that you use as well as those e-commerce channels. But Ross, you specialize in creating and building these workplace environments that work for people across a range of industries. How have you found that people's need for office workspace is changing, or rather workspace is changing, and how are you helping, I guess, first of all, your clients get ready for returning to that workplace?
Hi, good morning, and thank you for having me on. I think one of the big things we had is that obviously the government from the very beginning outlined that they wanted construction to continue, and they under a lot of criticism, but construction sites were kept on, and we had a number of projects that we were involved with timelines for clients that meant that we had to continue working at an early stage. And what that gave us is very much a very immediate impact, idea of how do we keep our employees, our subcontractors safe, how do we get deliveries to site, and how do we maintain a safe site. So it gave us a very, very fast insight into what we needed to do to conform with social distancing and leading that way. And that was from an initial phase, keeping the sites going was absolutely crucial. But what it did do is it gave us an insight into what we needed to then do, if you like, planning forward and working with our clients about social distancing within the workplace. And our initial, if you like, obviously you can imagine it comes as quite a shock to your business when no one's in the office and your market's disappeared. One of the things that we've really done is then been talking to our clients about, okay, well, what is the next phase? So we had an initial thing that we called it today, tomorrow and beyond, a bit like Mike's comment about the 3-5-5 phases. We found that there was today, how are we dealing with the offices today? How do we keep those offices going and keep staff talking? And then we had tomorrow, which is where we find ourselves now, where we're working with clients to look at their offices and what their occupation levels might be in a return to the office. And it's quite interesting from the point of view of, we've got organisations in London where the occupation for the next 2 to 3, 4 months could be as low as 10% in the offices, whereby we're talking to organisations, for example, who are out in the regional offices, Tunbridge Wells, for example, where we're getting much higher because people can drive to work, they can cycle to work, they can walk to work, and access is that much easier. So they're seeing a greater return in some of the regional offices rather than the central offices, because one of the greatest concerns for everyone is not necessarily within the workplace, but actually how do I get to the workplace, and making staff, colleagues, feel safe traveling into work or going home from that point of view. However, within the workplace, what we're looking at trying to do is help organizations to redesign the workplace, not making fundamental changes at the moment, but just in social distancing, looking at occupancy levels, looking at how we communicate within the office, signage, branding, without it being this huge eyesore in the office of everyone's got to keep social distancing and 2 meters and from that side. What we have seen, though, as a result of this is that projects that we were about to do, clients have either put them on hold because they just don't know what the office is going to look like in the future. We couldn't even see in March 3 months, let alone 6 months. And so as we've come out of this stage, we've started to see organizations really rethink how they've worked, because so many people have worked from home really, really well. And so in particular, we had a client that was looking at 24,000 square feet in Birmingham, and their requirement has reduced dramatically to 12,000 square feet. And we've had to redesign the design brief to support that business, because they fundamentally say, why would we go back? What do we need the office to do for us in redefining that office? And one of the things that we've been really focusing on is creating, in our words, a campus feel, so that it's a little bit like a university. And going back to those university days of you go to do your lectures. Why do I go to university? Well, I go to do a study or go to have a meeting or collaboration. And then my focus work might be at a library or a project space or in my home office from that point of view. And the project in Birmingham, for example, is really focused on that mindset. And that's really interesting from our point of view, because before COVID-19, one of the big focuses for the office was, how do we retain and attract the best possible people within our business? How do we make it more efficient, more effective within the workplace? And how do we attract that next generation, the university graduates? And they've come out of universities where they're used to working that way. And all of a sudden, we're now thinking, well, actually, the campus feel could be the right feel for how organizations might work. And I might still go home and work 2 to 3 days a week at home. But when I come into the office, I want to collaborate. I want to focus on meeting people and having that interaction, because at the end of the day, we're very much social beings. We like to talk. We like to meet. It's great. Teams. We introduced Teams into our business 18 months ago, and it was hard work to get everyone to use it and integrate it. The moment COVID came in, it's like everyone's on Teams and it's great. Now the thing is, actually, it'd be really nice to meet up. And I've come back into the office today, and I've got a colleague behind me working, and it's really nice to see them, and we can have a chat. And that's really important from that side. So we're sort of seeing it in 2 ways. There's the return to the office today to get us back to some sort of working in the next 2 to 3 months. And then there's, how's that going to look in 6 months' time? And where are we going to be with that?
So, Ross, thank you so much for that. And I know this was a topic that came up last week, and we spent some time on it. So I'd just like to open it to the floor. Just for people to share their perspectives and ask questions. Would anyone like to put a question to, and this, I know there's things coming through on chat, but would anyone like to put a question to Ross or to Tom?
Guys, don't forget to unmute yourself if you're trying to ask a question, but you may still be on mute.
I was just going to make an observation, Paul, on I suppose what the position that Ross was talking about, just anecdotally. We've seen that where firms are typically a smaller number of people in smaller format offices, they're able to plan getting back to work in a socially distant way a bit more easily. It's the you really see it in a stark way with the big firms of advisors that certainly I tend to work with a lot. You know, the challenges as they wrestle now with how to reopen offices of hundreds, if not thousands, of people over the coming months. It actually is just in the too hard box, and so the sentiment seems to be shifting towards, you know what, we're not going to even be back in those offices by the end of the calendar year, because it's not that you can't manage the desk space, you can't manage the access through, you know, the lifts and the access to the buildings just doesn't work. And that collaboration experience, those offices are not geared up for that. So I think the biggest office spaces may find it hardest of all.
And I think that picks up a point that Mark's raised in the meeting chat. You know, research has shown that social distancing of 2 meters in office won't prevent COVID spread because of long-term exposure. You know, Ross, how are your clients who are returned to offices addressing that? How are you seeing the setup having to alter?
I think what I think it was Mark said is probably, you know, correct, is that, you know, at the end of the day we can put in a lot of you know, signage, and we can put in perspex screens between desks, and you know, sanitization points all over the space from that point of view. The big thing for me is actually the checks that you could take, you know, before you come. You know, they've talked about a test that, you know, 20 minutes before you come to the office, you know, you take a test whether you know, and it should show sign within 20 minutes of a litmus test, you know, coming in. If that does happen, that's a game changer, because people then are checking before they come into the office, you know, from that point of view. And that was talked about a couple of weeks ago. We can only do so much within the office environment, and that's why we're seeing quite low. You know, we've been talking to a consultancy business who employ an awful lot of people, and they're talking about initial return to work of no more than 10%. You know, so because for that reason alone. And I think what will happen is that we've done planning based upon an initial 10%, and then growing to 20-25%, and then growing as we become a little bit more comfortable and maybe a bit more knowledgeable about how we manage the environment, you know, from that point of view. And the big thing is reassuring the staff that do come in that, you know, they're not putting themselves at risk, you know, from that point of view as well.
So Ross, I think that, you know, the concept of campus feel, I think, will resonate with a lot of people. Question from Stephen on the chat, just saying, well, how is that going to work for agile teams who tend to collaborate 100% of the time? And I think that also then plays into, you know, what is that future role and purpose of the workplace going to be? If you could just share, and I'm aware of the time, you know, just maybe some brief reflections on those, please.
I mean, I think we've recently done our offices, and actually we're working on the inn with Jonathan was actually really interesting, because actually that technology side of linking people together through technology, using technology to enhance the way that we work, and be able to collaborate using technology, you know, is going to help with the office. I mean, we're finding it. We've got everybody within our business. We've got construction guys, project managers, we've got creative teams as designers and graphic designers as well. And you think, how do I get that without meeting up? And within some of the tools of Teams and so on, you have that ability. And I think we're just having to find our way through and think outside the box. You know, we did a town hall yesterday to our business, you know, and yesterday it was really talking about, you know, we've got to think outside the box. How do we still maintain creating dynamic, you know, creative thinking, but over Teams, and maybe it could be a mix. It might be that some of the team are coming in the office, and then some people are working from home because their route is too difficult to come to the office, and we have to find that way through technology to support that.
And I think, Paul, just picking up just quickly on that last comment, I think part of the challenge, and we talked a bit about it last time, is the hybrid, and how do we deal with the some people wanting to work physically and the some people virtually. And I think a lot of people have seen the benefits for remote. Actually, I think the technology is there to do almost all of the elements around collaboration very, very effectively with people remotely, and actually for global enterprises trying to operate as one team. Actually, you have to work out how to do it globally and virtually, but the challenge does come back to that element of people creating an environment that people want to be in, and an informed organization people want to be in, and there is a mix of people, and there's the social side that is important if you're trying to attract people, and therefore being 100% remote doesn't work, but being hybrid is difficult, and I think it needs fundamental redesign. I'm conscious we haven't got the time, it might be an after party topic, but around really what sort of demand is actually coming in at the moment for people to completely rethink their office layout before people return, or whether it's just too early to say. But I'm conscious we're a bit out of time here, Paul, so I don't know whether you want to wrap up.
This isn't quite the end, as we said before. We're going to be keeping the line open for for more informal discussion on networking, as I said before, the after party. So thank you all ever so much. Our next forum is on Thursday, the 11th of June. You're all invited. We'll be focusing on hearing more transition perspectives from the retail industry and more besides, and some of those key corporate messages we need to focus on. I'd like to thank our panelists. I'd like to thank you, our attendees. Thank you for all the questions, and apologies if I didn't get to cover all of them. If you do have any more questions or thinking, please also follow up with the people you know from Protiviti and Robert Half. So we sincerely hope the forum's been useful to you once again, and you can apply some of these thoughts to your business. So on behalf of Protiviti and my Robert Half team, I'd like to extend our best wishes to you all. Stay safe, and we look forward to meeting with you all again soon. Thank you very much, everyone.
And we're just going to stay on, Paul, for anyone who's got
anyone
be staying
stay on. Absolutely.
So Ross, maybe just picking up on, I guess, my quick question. I was just sort of throwing out at the end. Interested, assuming you've got time to stay on, to what extent to what extent you're actually seeing people come with requests to rethink that, not just to deal with effectively we want the same work environment, we've got to make it safe. There's that element that's clearly going on everywhere, but actually people stepping back and rethinking a little bit. There's a lot positives come out of collaborating. I do wonder to some extent whether, particularly for some of the big consulting companies, we've seen a lot of efficiency benefits from not coming to the office, losing the travel time, the commuting time, the clients not expecting us to go back and forth. So a lot of opportunity that we've seen to actually be much more efficient in a 100% digital world, and some benefits that come from that. But I think there are disadvantages as well. To what extent have you actually seen requests yet for organizations to actually say, we want to tear up a chunk of our office and rebuild it because we recognize we want to create something new before everybody starts to come back into the office environment, or is it just too soon for that?
I think where we're seeing is where clients had projects that were about to go live, they were about to go to search for property or a new lease or something from that point, or redesign their office. They've come back and wanted to rethink how they work. I think that they've taken the opportunity because the timing is right, and we've got 2 or 3 projects where that is definitely happening at the moment. I think at the moment we're seeing more people think about, okay, look, we just need some sort of return to work, and then we'll rethink. We'll take time out to think about, where we're going to be, maybe in August, September, October, maybe even the second part, the very end of the year from that point of view. I think one of the things that hasn't come out and yet is that, and we talked about it with Paul and myself about, in our business, we've got a wide range of people, but we've got very young, from 23 to 30, living in London, living in flats, not the biggest flats, working in their bedrooms. They're not the biggest flats in the world. And then you've got people living in the countryside. I live in the countryside, and actually being in isolation out there and working there is actually, it's lovely. It's great. It's a mindset, to get around. And the people that have wanted to come back into the office are the younger generation, because they want to change. They don't want to be in their small flats, or they're sharing flats as well. And so we've had, from our experience, we've had more people that way, wanting to, just want that social interaction, we created an environment.
About half international. We have quite a fairly young demographic. We're very similar. We've got people who are very keen to get back into the office if they don't have families at home, or if they're living in flats and apartments, and actually just really hungry to have that social interaction. I mean, recruiters in particular are very social creatures. It's also how we do our business. We share information, we share ideas. It's how we learn, actually. It's how we learn and develop. And so I think a lot of people are missing that social interaction. I would have thought that, we had a conversation last week, Ross, around, we had an insurance business on who were looking to change their model, and taking time office space was one of them. But I would imagine, Jonathan, the financial constraints that businesses are experiencing at the moment, all sorts of areas of spend will put a stop on people making those types of investments, and perhaps reconsidering where and how they make investments for the next 2 years, whereas previously office environment, employee engagement was exceptionally important and still remains exceptionally important. How do we invest in our people? How do we invest in our business for the next 2 years? Because the landscape for a lot of sectors looks very different now, doesn't it? So actually, it's not that the investment wouldn't, you wouldn't want to create a nice office environment for your staff, but perhaps there are other considerations, like Tom's referring to earlier, about how do we make sure that we get our, if we help us, invest in our stock and have stock and supply chain, and keep our customers.
Can I ask Ross a question? It's Chris Roberts.
Yeah, of course,
Ross,
Chris.
From your background, where's the biggest challenge in big building reconfigurations? Is it the entrances and exits to the buildings? Is it those common areas, or actually is it the floors where the individual businesses operate from?
I would say the main problems we're seeing is actually entering into the building, and on something like multiple on multiple floors. I think Tom said, the access in via staircases, lifts. The government have issued a document guideline on lifts and how you should, do them. I mean, there's a reality here that I think in for example, the Shard, you walk into the Shard and you've got 4 people. In theory, they've got to walk in and face the glass, or face the walls. So you have your backs to each other. Okay, so how do you see the signage? So what floor to get. Just some basic things from that point of view. So, all of a sudden, getting into multiple buildings, we've got a client who's just taken 4 stories, four floors. They can only get, in theory, according to the government guidelines, 1 person in the lift at a time. Now, okay, you can use the stairs, but one stairs is outside and one stairs is inside. So great in the summer. What about in the winter? Are we going to ask people to go outside when it's raining, or are we going to, every building is different, and some buildings lend themselves perfectly to it.
Yes, one of the universities I'm talking to, they've got huge issues. The corridors aren't big enough. The entrances, the corridors end in stops. They'll have to create doorways to create one-way systems. It's a huge issue.
Yeah.
It's great to see we've got, I think, 29, 30 people here. Anyone else wish to share a perspective? I know our screens will only do kind of 9 box matrices here, but.
Hello, can I expand on my spectator question?
Of course.
Hi. So I think the threat of clawback, could definitely prompt some firms to some boards. This is really a board level question, right? About returning funds if they haven't kept within the strict spirit. But I think there's another side to this, a more positive side, is that a board might look at its balance sheet and say, look, we did better than we thought we were going to do. We'd be more resilient. And in fact, looking at, you know, we have to understand the economic context we're operating in. We have customers who haven't done very well out of this, that you know, haven't survived or having a very, very tough time. Isn't it our corporate social responsibility